Ladies and gentlemen, let's start with a question that cuts to the bone. What do you do when the very people who are supposed to love you the most turn their backs on you? What do you do when the ones who share your blood, your parents, your siblings, your own flesh and blood, cast you aside as if you were nothing more than a stranger on the street? This is not just a tragic circumstance. It's a psychological catastrophe. It's an existential betrayal. Because the family is the fundamental unit of human survival, the tribe, the shelter against the chaos of the world. And when that foundation crumbles beneath you, what's left? Where do you stand? Families are not just groups of individuals. They are complex systems with deeply ingrained hierarchies, roles, and expectations. When someone is rejected by their family, it is often not just a personal issue, but a disruption of the family system itself. Every family, whether consciously or unconsciously, establishes a structure that dictates how each member is supposed to behave. These structures are often reinforced through tradition, culture, and unspoken rules that dictate the balance of power within the household. When one person deviates from these expectations, the family system perceives it as a threat to its stability. People assume that families are based purely on love and mutual support, but in reality, they are built on a fragile balance of authority, obligation, and identity. Each member has a role to play. There's the caregiver, the golden child, the black sheep, the enforcer of rules, and the one who carries the emotional burdens of the group. These roles keep the family operating in a predictable manner. However, if someone refuses to conform to their assigned role, if they challenge the family's authority, pursue a path that contradicts their values, or highlight uncomfortable truths, the family system reacts defensively. This can manifest as exclusion, emotional distancing, or outright rejection. At the core of this rejection is often a fear of disruption. Families resist change because change means uncertainty. If one member breaks free from the expected mold, it forces others to question their own identity and choices. This is particularly true in families where dysfunction, generational trauma, or control play a significant role. A person who refuses to accept toxic patterns or outdated values becomes a symbol of rebellion, and the family, unwilling to face its flaws, may push that person away instead. This phenomenon is why rejection often feels so deeply unjust. The individual being cast out may not have done anything wrong, other than choosing a path of truth and authenticity. Yet, because their growth or transformation threatens the family's established order, they become the scapegoat. Families often prefer maintaining dysfunction over confronting uncomfortable realities. It is easier for them to label someone as the problem rather than acknowledge the system itself is flawed. Understanding that families operate as systems allows one to see rejection not as a personal failure, but as a predictable reaction to change. Recognizing this can help prevent internalizing the pain and instead empower one to seek a new path beyond the constraints of the past. Families often place unspoken expectations on their members, shaping their identities and dictating their choices. These expectations can be cultural, religious, or personal, but they always serve the purpose of maintaining order within the family unit. From an early age, individuals are conditioned to believe that their worth is tied to how well they fulfill these roles. Some are expected to be obedient, others to be caretakers, and some to carry on family traditions without question. When someone decides to forge their own path, the family may see it as an act of defiance rather than an act of self-discovery. Rejection often comes not because a person has done something objectively wrong, but because they have disrupted the established order. If a child chooses a career that goes against their family's beliefs, questions long-held traditions, or refuses to accept unhealthy dynamics, they challenge the family's perception of what is right and acceptable. This challenge is often met with resistance, guilt, tripping, and, in extreme cases, complete alienation. The family sees this departure as a betrayal, not because the person has harmed them, but because they are refusing to conform to an identity that was created for them. For many families, maintaining harmony is more important than allowing individual freedom. They would rather see a person suppress their true self than disrupt the collective unity. This is why personal growth is sometimes met with hostility rather than support. A family might reject someone not because they are making poor choices, but because they are making choices that highlight the limitations of those who remain. If one person breaks free from a toxic cycle, whether it be poverty, addiction, or an oppressive belief system, it forces others to reflect on their own lives. This kind of self-reflection is painful, and instead of embracing change, the family may choose to reject the person who initiated it. The tragedy is that rejection in these cases is not about morality or love. It is about control. Many families love conditionally, meaning their acceptance is based on compliance rather than genuine care. When that compliance is no longer there, the love is withdrawn. Those who experience this rejection often feel confused and betrayed, but it is crucial to understand that the issue lies not with them, but with the family's unwillingness to embrace change. True acceptance is not about conformity. It is about allowing people to become who they truly are without fear of abandonment. Family dynamics are often shaped by deep-seated emotions that people rarely acknowledge, envy and resentment being two of the most powerful. These emotions can fester beneath the surface, influencing relationships in ways that are neither rational nor fair. While families are expected to be places of love and support, they can also be breeding grounds for competition, comparison, and hidden grudges. When one member of the family achieves something that others feel they cannot, it can create an unspoken tension that eventually leads to rejection. Resentment often arises when one person defies the expectations placed upon them and succeeds in ways that others did not. If someone grows beyond the limitations of their upbringing, whether through education, career, personal development, or emotional resilience, it can trigger feelings of inadequacy in those who remain stagnant. Instead of celebrating that person's achievements, the family may react with passive aggressiveness, coldness, or outright exclusion. This is not always a conscious decision. Many people do not realize that their rejection of a family member stems from their own unaddressed insecurities. Envy is particularly destructive because it distorts perception. A person who has worked hard to build a better life may be seen not as an inspiration, but as a threat. Their success reminds others of what they have failed to do, and rather than confront their own shortcomings, they project negativity onto the one who has changed. This pattern is deeply rooted in human psychology and can be seen in countless myths and stories throughout history. The biblical tale of Cain and Abel is a perfect example. Cain was not rejected because Abel did anything wrong, but because Abel's success made Cain feel inferior. Instead of improving himself, Cain destroyed his brother. This same dynamic plays out in families across generations. Another source of resentment comes from past wounds that were never healed. A parent might reject a child because they see too much of themselves in them, especially the parts of themselves they regret. A sibling might distance themselves because they feel overshadowed. These wounds, if not acknowledged, turn into resentment that poisons relationships. Unfortunately, many people choose to cut ties rather than confront these painful emotions. Understanding that family rejection is often rooted in envy and resentment allows a person to see the situation clearly. It is not always about wrongdoing. Sometimes it is about others being unable to accept someone else's growth. Recognizing this truth can help prevent internalizing the rejection and instead encourage moving forward without guilt or shame. Rejection from family can feel deeply personal, but more often than not, it is a reflection of their own unresolved issues rather than any true flaw in the person being rejected. People tend to believe that if their family turns their back on them, it must mean they have done something wrong, or that they are unworthy of love. This belief is dangerous because it places the blame entirely on the individual, without considering the psychological and emotional struggles that exist within the family itself. Families operate on long-standing patterns, many of which are built on dysfunction, trauma, or unspoken pain. When a family rejects someone, it is often because that person challenges or disrupts these patterns. Perhaps they refuse to tolerate emotional manipulation, refuse to follow an outdated belief system, or simply remind others of truths they do not want to face. In such cases, rejection is not about the individual's actions, but about the family's inability to process their own emotional discomfort. Rather than addressing their own weaknesses or failures, they find it easier to blame and distance themselves from the person who represents change. Many times, family members project their own insecurities onto the one they reject. A parent who was unable to achieve their dreams may resent a child who does. A sibling who feels overlooked may lash out at the one who receives more attention. An extended family that is operated under toxic traditions may turn against the one who refuses to conform. These situations have little to do with the actual character of the rejected individual, and everything to do with the fears, regrets, and disappointments of the people doing the rejecting. Another important factor is emotional maturity. Some people simply lack the ability to process difficult emotions in a healthy way. Instead of having honest conversations or working through conflicts, they choose to cut people off as a way to avoid discomfort. In this sense, rejection becomes a defense mechanism, a way for them to maintain control and avoid looking inward. Unfortunately, the person being rejected often internalizes the pain, believing they are unlovable or broken, when in reality they were simply caught in the crossfire of someone else's unresolved issues. Recognizing that rejection is often a reflection of the one doing the rejecting rather than the one being rejected allows for healing. It shifts the perspective from self-blame to understanding, making it easier to let go of guilt and move forward without carrying unnecessary emotional burdens. When a person is rejected by their family, one of the most immediate and natural emotional responses is resentment. The pain of being cast aside, especially by those who are supposed to love and support you unconditionally, can easily turn into bitterness. This bitterness feels justified. After all, the rejection was unfair, unprovoked, and deeply wounding. But while the initial anger may be understandable, holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. It corrodes the soul, distorts perception, and ultimately leads a person down a dark path of self-destruction. Resentment is particularly dangerous because it disguises itself as power. It convinces a person that by holding on to their anger, they are somehow winning, that they are proving a point to those who hurt them. In reality, resentment only serves to keep a person emotionally tethered to the very people who rejected them. Instead of breaking free, they remain psychologically trapped, replaying past hurts over and over again. This constant mental engagement with the pain prevents healing and keeps them from focusing on building a better future. Over time, bitterness starts to reshape a person's character. It makes them cynical, distrustful, and defensive. They begin to see betrayal everywhere, even where it does not exist. They build walls so high that even those who genuinely care for them struggle to break through. In an attempt to protect themselves from further rejection, they end up pushing away opportunities for love, friendship, and connection. Without realizing it, they become exactly what they despise: cold, closed off, and incapable of giving or receiving genuine affection. The most tragic aspect of resentment is that it often leads a person to repeat the very patterns they swore to escape. The rejected child becomes a parent who alienates their own children. The abandoned sibling becomes someone who cuts off relationships too easily. The person who was made to feel worthless begins making others feel the same, not out of malice, but because their pain was never fully addressed. This is how cycles of hurt continue across generations. The only way to escape this fate is to recognize resentment for what it is: a trap. Letting go of bitterness does not mean forgetting what happened or excusing those who caused harm. It means refusing to allow the past to define the future. True strength is found not in holding on to anger, but in reclaiming one's own peace, purpose, and ability to love despite the wounds of the past. Rejection from family can feel like the ultimate betrayal, but it does not have to define the rest of a person's life. While the pain of being cast aside may be overwhelming, the real power lies in what comes next. Many people fall into the trap of believing that their worth is determined by whether or not their family accepts them. This mindset keeps them stuck in an endless loop of seeking approval, revisiting old wounds, and longing for validation that may never come. The truth is, no one needs permission from their family to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. The most important realization after experiencing family rejection is that a person still has full control over their own destiny. The pain is real, the wounds are deep, but there is always a choice. Either stay trapped in the cycle of resentment and longing, or take full responsibility for building a life of value and purpose. This means shifting focus away from what was lost and toward what can still be created. It means stepping into a mindset of self-reliance rather than victimhood. No one can erase the past, but they can decide whether it will be a prison or a lesson. Part of moving forward is redefining what family means. Just because someone is related by blood does not mean they are the only source of love, support, and belonging. True family is found in the people who respect, uplift, and accept one another without conditions. Sometimes, the most loyal and supportive people are those met later in life, rather than those who share the same last name. Seeking out and cultivating relationships based on mutual respect and understanding is far more valuable than trying to force connections that no longer serve one's growth. Another essential step is focusing on personal growth and excellence. The best way to rise above rejection is not through proving anything to those who turned away, but by becoming the strongest and most capable version of oneself. This means investing in meaningful work, pursuing passions, and building a future that is independent of past wounds. Success, not as a form of revenge, but as a declaration of self-worth, is one of the most powerful responses to rejection. Moving forward does not mean forgetting or pretending that the pain never existed. It means refusing to let it dictate the future. A person who has been rejected by their family can still create a life filled with meaning, purpose, and deep connections. The key is to step into personal power and refuse to let the failures of others determine one's destiny.